Holy cow, Brian. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. We're going to keep a streak going, multiple streaks, as a matter of fact, going, possibly break another one. And I'll use a famous line we've used in the past. It's not our fault. So today, for those in the future coming back in time, this we'll see if this podcast ages gracefully or not, Brian, because this is February 10th, 2022, discussing the trade deadline and officially, I guess we could call, the return of the Boxscore Geek show. To keep our running joke going, you preseason claimed that we would start the Boxscore Geek show up because many of us were busy, you, me, etc. Patrick as well. It's been a while since he's been on, but anyway, we were all busy, and you said, "Okay, here's the plan. We'll start the show back up as soon as Ben Simmons is traded, because in the off season it was a foregone conclusion. Ben Simmons was out the door in Philadelphia, and they waited just like us, procrastinated to the last minute. So officially, the Boxscore Geek show is back. So I'm your host, Trey Alvarez, and with me, as always, is the worst predictor, Brian Foster. Or maybe you just want a lot of time off, Brian. I can't fault you for that.
Yeah, so this trade deadline was pretty spicy. We got
awesome.
a lot more deals than we usually get, I feel like. And as you mentioned on the last show, you don't normally get two players that can, be in the top 10 of the league getting traded for each other very often. Usually it's a lot more one-sided than that. So yeah, there are going to be a lot of deals we talk about that I'm just going to say right now probably don't matter that much. It's moving the deck chairs, but we will try to identify the ones that matter.
So yeah, let's have some fun with that. So by the plan, by the way, we're this is and I joking with procrastinating, Brian. Like, I'm late to doing my homework too, so I've got like a half filled up spreadsheet. We're going to the ESPN trade machine, going reverse chronological. So we're going to start with February 4th, and this is a good one to start with because I want to give some trade analysis tools that I like to use when analyzing trades. And you used a great phrase, which is this first one, shuffling deck chairs. So on February 4th, and I'm assuming we're on the same page, but I'm on ESPN.com, the trade tracker. On February 4th, the Clippers acquire Covington and Powell from the Trailblazers. So the Los Angeles Clippers got Covington, Robert Covington, Norman Powell, and the Portland Trailblazers got Eric Bledsoe, Justice Winslow, and Keon Johnson. And I hope, and by the way, I'll be fully honest here, like in saying, I hope I get the names right, because like none of the, like, so here's the thing in this. So here's a couple set of steps I want to give out before we start discussing trade, just like overarching. First theme I'm going to give you is the Jeff Van Gundyism. He's not the first person to say this by any means, but I just remember it the most, which is the team that gets the best player in the trade wins. That was a metric he has used. The defense he gave that for was trading Steve Francis for Tracy McGrady. 100% true, right? Steve Francis at the time was an above average good player. His nickname was the franchise. But if you can trade a really good player for a star, you take it. So, and there, you can, I was looking at that trade. There may be some caveats you could have given that trade, maybe the upside, whatever, but anybody at the time, ourselves included, would say Tracy McGrady for Steve Francis. You take that in a heartbeat. And we're going to be using that a lot throughout this. Now, the other term you used is deck chairs, which I feel is really important, which is to say, here's the rough reality, Brian. Most players and assets in the NBA don't matter in the sense that they are interchangeable and easily replaceable.
Yep.
So, for example, here's what I'm going to be mean. Draft picks are virtually meaningless in trades, especially future picks, even first round picks. Now you might say to yourself, well, what about the time the Los Angeles Clippers traded their first round pick to the Cleveland Cavaliers and it turned into Kyrie Irving? Well, that had more to do with luck of the draw than the value of the asset. And in fact, we'd even argue, and we've kept arguing this, you and I were having this back and forth. It's going to come up again with the Kings. The irony is, the draft is not how you want to build your team. Well, it's a lot of fun to make fun of bad drafting. I almost said bad drafting kings. I meant to say teams, but hell, let's throw the Kings out because a popular one coming up. You and Chris Ye have both brought it up to me this week. The Nick Stauskas video, which is infamous and hilarious at this point. The reality is that for most teams, if you try and build through the draft, you're going to fail. Even the good players like Kevin Durant, even like Kyrie Irving, they take a little while to ramp up. So really, draft picks don't matter. Most players don't matter because both players are average or below average, and therefore by argument should be replaceable. So this first pick is fantastic in that the only player that's kind of reasonable is Justice Winslow, who's above average, but he has been banged. He was a great looking draft prospect. We really liked him. He has not stayed healthy. I'm going to look at his numbers really quick on Boxscore Geeks. If I recall, I don't think he's cracked 1,500 minutes in a season. Am I wrong on that? Okay, I was wrong twice. In Miami, he managed to get to 1,600 minutes his third year and 1,900 after. And then since then, just 300, 500, 400. Yeah, he's not going to crack 1,000 minutes this season. Sorry. Eric Bledsoe we actually thought he was a good contract when he was picked up by Milwaukee, but then we were actually fine with them moving on because he's older and declining. Keon Johnson is terrible. Robert Covington has always been one of these kind of middling players in this season. I mean, if they played him as a small forward, he'd stand a chance at being above average, but this season is below average. Norman Powell is also below average. So no player in this trade is above average, really, or a good asset. Future second round pick, get out of here. This trade is entirely meaningless. 100% a dead trade. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, pretty much. So this is kind of a Rorschach test for what do you think about Norman Powell. Kind of the mainstream view on this trade is that since the Blazers are breaking up the team, they should have gotten more for Powell than just a salary dump. But I'm with you. I'm just not a Powell guy. I don't think he matters that much, so I don't think this trade really matters.
All right, perfect. Okay, let's keep moving. This one is also kind of up there, so this is more interesting than anything.
Yeah.
So the Cleveland Cavaliers get Karis LeVert off of the Indiana Pacers, and the Indiana Pacers get Ricky Rubio. Now, I kind of like this in kind of a stay in place, doesn't matter. So here's what's funny. I'm going to immediately kind of turn around. So this is still a deck chairs move, but why I like it is Karis LeVert is just not really all that good. And I want to take a look at his SPO track really quick because I think his value is higher than his production. So this is a thing we're a fan of, which is to say most players don't matter. But if you are going to, oh, and by the way, it's La as an L-E, not La. I typed it in Karis LeVert. So this is like perfect. So Karis LeVert, good God, Brian, signed to signed to like a 17.5 million a year deal for 3 years. Horrible contract. Has not been above average. Worst position. He's a shooting guard. So the Indiana Pacers get out of that bad deal. They get back Ricky Rubio, who is older, beat up, not really all that good, but fine. A reasonable point guard. And he, kind of has been for the last few seasons. And get a bunch of future. And we like to immediately kind of fall back on what we've said. I like draft picks in terms of being able to have currency to spend, but they are not team building. So if you want money that you're able to use in future trades for good players, draft picks are great. Where I get annoyed and laugh is when people are like, oh man, the draft pick next year and that stacked draft is going to be so useful. It's like, no, it's not. Sorry. And Ricky Rubio's on an expiring deal. So this is a fantastic deal for the Pacers in that they turned an overpriced asset into a serviceable player who could potentially help this season. I don't think the Pacers have a shot this season at the playoffs. I mean, I guess
they're rebuilding. They're gutting the team. It's worth pointing out Ricky Rubio is out for the season.
Oh, okay. Well,
that's a big. That's why the Cavs made this trade, is that they're like, we're short on guards now. Rubio's out for the season, and Colin Sexton is also out for the year. So they have 2 guards out for the year. We're like, we got to salvage something for this. We're going to get LeVert. I'm with you. He's not that efficient, but they're hoping to have him in the playoffs.
Now, yeah, well, this gets interesting actually to that point because we love Cleveland. We've loved Cleveland for a lot, and really the reason we love them is their bigs, right? I don't know. Oh, that's me. Sorry. I really hate ESPN with autoplay ads. So let me just refresh. Hopefully that didn't come through into your mic, but if it did, apologies, stream. But what I was going to say is we have loved the bigs. We've loved Mobley, Kevin Love, just everything about, I stole from you, but called it the Cleveland Cavalier skyline. It's not the 2 towers. It's an entire skyline. So we've loved that entirely. And the major issue is their backcourt's kind of been hurting. So A similar trade back in the day that this might relate to is when they traded for like Timofey Mozgov, who was we would say easily was overpriced. Now that being said, he helped them in a playoff run. So the Cleveland Cavaliers have a possibility of actually being like the top seed out in the East. I actually have some money out on that. I followed Arturo Galletti on Twitter, and he was like, "Oh, the things are great." So like, I make $500 if the Cleveland Cavaliers win the East. I make like $100 if they win the Central, and I make like $1,000 if they make it to the finals. So I am a huge fan of them just slightly improving their team. This has actually been one thing we've said forever, right? Which is, if you're a team, you can be inefficient if it gets you over the edge. Where we get mad is like start of the season, some team pays Karis, like the Pacers pay Levert like 52 million. You're like, what the hell are you doing? So yeah, I don't necessarily think it's the most efficient way to do it, but it's something. And and to what I was just saying, these picks are worth nothing in the future. So if you improve your playoff chances this year, worth it. So I'm actually behind both teams, with maybe some criticism saying the Cavs might have been able to get something better.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to move the needle.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it might move the needle a game or two, which is what you need if you're Cleveland, but it's not a great, it's by no means a great move. All right. Moving on. This was a very surprising one, another Rorschach test, as you put it, in that when this trade came through, this is New Orleans Pelicans with the Portland Trailblazers. When this trade came through, basically you have people that are right and went, holy cow, New Orleans just got or not New Orleans, Portland just made a really smart move. And if Lillard's coming back next season, this is a great rebuilding move. And you got people saying, oh my goodness, Portland's blowing it up. Lillard is gone. So recap. Let's look at this, and I'll try and run down it. It's kind of hard. Okay, so Portland got Josh Hart, who at the moment is the best player on the Pelicans by our numbers, close to star level, and that's with it. Like, he's another one of these classics for us, right, Brian? A player that plays power forward some of the time. We have him listed as a 3.5, so he's listed as a power forward based on his size. We basically split the difference half the time. He's like a pure forward according to our numbers, but he's close to star level production wise. 188 wins per 48. I hate autoplay so much, Brian. Okay. He's the highest wins player on New Orleans Pelicans, 5.3. Absolutely great player. And we were saying as early as back with the Lakers when he was included in the Anthony Davis trade, we were kind of going like, man, it'd be really nice if they could keep Hart and trade Kuzma. So Josh Hart's one of these like perennially underrated players that we absolutely love. There's that. Now you got Satoransky. Satoransky's kind of weird in that for the Wizards, he was a really good guard. He has not really looked fantastic for the Pelicans. There's hope, but I think he's young. The other ones don't really matter. So Nickeil Alexander-Walker, god awful right now, and I'm apologizing ahead of time for butchering everybody's names. And then Didi Louzada, however you say it, has played.
I've never even heard of that player.
Yeah, he's played a grand total of 7 minutes. So even though they're below average, I'm not going to do anything. And then they also got some picks. But I mean, basically, if we're using the metric of Jeff Van Gundy, Portland got the best player in the trade, not even close, Josh Hart. Now, the players that New Orleans got back, they got back McCollum, and McCollum forever has been this player that we are just like, why the hell are you paying this player? As an example, so let's use the box score Geeks for fun. Let's use it for good. So I'm going to go look at CJ McCollum's page now, and I'm kind of saying like Gollum, but whatever. If we look at his career true shooting percentage, it's 55.2%. In the same span of time, an average wing would be shooting 54.7%. Now, last season, he shot 57.7%, and this season is shooting 53.2%. League average is right around 56% true shooting. So basically, CJ McCollum is a shooting guard that I think maybe 2 or 3 times in his years has shot above average. I am just going to have to find a better page than ESPN. That autoplay is really getting on. But he's this overpaid shooting guard that can't shoot. This is a Billy Beanism, a Moneyballism. Like, if he's such a great shooter, why doesn't he shoot? Now, a couple players, we will say that Larry Nance Jr., he's about an average power forward. He's had a bigger ceiling, so we've liked him in the past. He's pretty good. And Tony Snell, one of my favorite Brianisms is Tony Snell does nothing well. He had a couple seasons in
Yeah.
Milwaukee where he looked okay, but it feels very Greg Popovich-y. I got to say that just, it's one of these comments we've kind of made before, very similar to Brad Stevens, very similar to Greg Popovich. If a player looks really good on Milwaukee and you trade for him, you probably got to give him a ding. And if you're trading a player to Milwaukee, you got to give him a boost. So like Tony Snell, once he left Milwaukee, didn't look great for Detroit, was okay for Atlanta, and has been below average for Portland. So Portland easily wins this trade, traded out a horrible contract, Tony Snell, who's not good, and Larry Nance, who's all right. So easy winner of this trade is Portland. And like I said, the Rorschach test that I've been laughing at is like anybody that's like, oh my goodness, Portland got rid of CJ McCollum. What are they doing? It's like, no, this was a win. They got out of a bad contract.
Yeah, and I haven't looked into it deeply yet, but it does look like a salary dump. So if that's true, if Portland did well with the salaries here, then yeah, I agree with you. It was a really good trade. In McCollum's defense, I think he could be better outside of Portland. He's just kind of too similar to Lillard, but just a worse version, right? And so I've been a Portland hater on this show for a long time, actually. And I keep getting surprised that they were, like third or fourth seed or whatever, or maybe they were lower than that, but they made the playoffs quite a bit. And I'm like, no one plays defense on this team, right? Like Lillard's good, but he's kind of small and doesn't defend as much. McCollum is also small and doesn't defend, but a worse shooter. Nurkic, definitely an offensive player, right? And so it looks like they had to give up Larry Nance to get rid of McCollum's contract, and that's fine. Nance, we liked him in Cleveland, but he wasn't great in Portland either. So Portland's, they're doing the right thing. They finally realized what I've been complaining about for years. So, of course, I agree with them. That core was not going to get it done defensively in the playoffs.
A common theme, we're stealing Dave Barry's second book title, which is Stumbling on Wins. I am not inclined to believe most, if any, NBA teams know what the hell they're doing. And a lot of even the quote unquote savvy teams in this trade deadline, we'll get to some of them, just I'm not impressed by, and I'm in fact straight confused by. So when you're like Trailblazers do the right move, it's like, you're right. They might think they're doing a salary dump and not realize what they're getting back. And then let's get to our next trade, because this is one of the most fascinating. I almost got a piece out on this, Brian.
Can I just say one more thing about Portland before we move on? I remember there was one offseason maybe 3 or 4 years ago where they had a really good offseason and made all these good moves, and we're like, wow, look at Portland. Like they might have gone and gotten Ed Davis or something, and done all these moves. Are like, good job, Portland. And then every year after that, they just started making terrible moves, right? So they just kind of got lucky one season, I think. Anyway, let's go to the next trade.
Well, I think that's important, is right. A lot of these trades, when we look at under our lens, we're like, okay, you're clearly targeting these players. And then what might be funny is if you go to the front office and talk to them, they'd be like, oh yeah, we just had to dump CJ McCollum's contract. We just picked up Josh Hart to just make it work. And obviously the steal of this is, this future draft pick we're going to let, and you're like, oh, you didn't know what you were doing. And I told Dave Barry this morning. I repeated a quote back to him where he's, when we were talking about the Spurs back in the day, where he's going, I thought you knew why you were winning. You don't know? You didn't realize what you were doing? And that's what a lot of this.
Great point about Josh Hart, by the way. We love him and always thought he's a good player when he's healthy anyway. And famously, he's publicly hates analytics and numbers and nerds and all that. So
all right, well,
that makes me like him.
This is perfect. This is a perfect team. So we're going to talk the Kings. Yeah. And what I've said about this point, when you see players and pundits hate analytics, what's really key to note is that a lot of the analytics they have been fed are garbage. All analytics are is numbers. And one of the most annoying parts, it's very much like fad diets. I know we've talked this before. If you just tell someone diet and exercise, people hate that. I hate that advice because it's hard and it's boring and it's annoying. But when you say, hey, all you have to do is eat grapefruit or whatever, right? People are like, oh, I'm on board, or, oh, you do this and it ups your metabolism. It doesn't. People are like, oh, sell me more. So, I mean, a lot of what the analytics that have made the NBA are fad diets. And then you see people that pay attention and go, oh, this is garbage. You've been selling me garbage. So I think I give a lot of, it's funny where I would like to be on board with bashing players and pundits and coaches for hating analytics. but I also know what they've been getting fed. And I'm like, oh, okay, I see why you're saying it.
Yeah.
And it's really rough because, like, a lot of times I get lumped in with people. I'm like, yeah, I agree with you. Their work's garbage too. I wouldn't want to listen to that either. If that was the analytics I was getting, I would hate analytics as well.
Yep.
Speaking of a quote unquote analytics savvy team, the Sacramento Kings. Now, this one is one of the more, I love this trade, Brian, for so many reasons. So the key names. So from the Jeff Van Gundyism, this is a hard trade. I tweeted out about this because the Pacers get Tyrese Haliburton, who we think is a star, worth 8.8 wins this season. And the Kings get Sabonis, who we think is a star, and he's worth 8.8 wins this season. Oh boy, this is fun. Now, according to our other logic, the rest of the stuff is deck chairs. Buddy Hield, Tristan Thompson, Jeremy Lamb, Justin Holiday, 20s, 22nd. Okay, so just to be clear, the Pacers get Buddy Hield and Tristan Thompson. The Sacramento Kings get Jeremy Lamb and Justin Holiday. These two players, by the way, have been productive in the past, but have been kind of beat up and are middle and close to average.
Holiday actually started for the Kings tonight, I think, or last night.
Which is fine. I mean, he's not, to the point, it's not like he's a bad player. He's not a player I would want to start, but I'm just saying in general, this is what always amuses me in analyzing NBA teams when I'm like, they're an average player. That's good. It's going to help your team. But if you're an above average front office and you can't acquire an average starter for league average prices, what are you doing? So really, we're just looking at Sabonis versus.
Especially now that there's the G League, right? Teams have a minor league system.
And it really, up until very recently, it hasn't been getting used correctly. And really, I give Ben Guest floated this idea. I had never thought of it before. I think when he was talking to Dave Barry, a fantastic idea for an NBA team would be to say, go to an Arturo or Lane Vastrow or Ari Caroline draft board, right? One of these people that, publishes a spreadsheet of their draft picks. Find all of the underrated players that fall to the second round or go undrafted. Get all of them and make an NBA G League team with them and basically just kind of put them together. And you will probably find a valid NBA starter. And the bigger key is you will find an NBA starter that is happy to be there and willing to listen. Whereas if you kind of do the Hinkie model where you draft a bunch of top 10 picks to try and find the next great star,
right?
3 of those players are going to hate you and their agents are going to hate you because they're not getting minutes. They're not going to get paid. So to your point on the G League is an underutilized asset because what teams should be doing in the draft is shotgunning a bunch of second round picks, putting together a G League team, finding the players that shine and bringing them up a la baseball. And that hasn't really caught on yet, but it could. But anyway, but to that point, getting back to here with like no teams moving the dial, it's Haliburton versus Sabonis. And I want to get your take because we were going back and forth because I don't think this trade is as bad for Sacramento as others are saying, but I do think my 2 cents is Sacramento lost this trade, and I'll give my 2 cents on it. After you give yours, especially since I stole a lot of your takes in our back and forth.
No, this is a really interesting trade because, so you pointed out when we were talking about trades earlier today that I tend to grade teams on a curve. That I'm like, this isn't great for them, but I expected them to do a lot worse because it's the Kings. So there's some of that going on. So one thing is, Sabonis is good, right? They got an all-star back for Haliburton, and that's something, right? They could have gotten nothing for him. But the process is really bad. So for one thing, I think Haliburton should have been in the All-Star game this year, not the Rising Stars game. I think that he's that good. I mean, I've been a fan for a long time, even before the draft, but I'm really impressed with how he's played so far. Already, a 40+% three-point shooter, already a lockdown defender. Like, he is good, and he's like 5 or 6 years younger than Sabonis too. I think he's only 21 still, or 22. So yeah, I think the Pacers that got Haliburton did definitely win the trade, but the Kings could have done something way worse. But then here's the problem with it: the reporting after this trade went down was that other teams in the league apparently love Haliburton too, and were pissed off because they didn't think he was available.
All right.
The Kings didn't talk to anyone else about Haliburton to bid up the price.
I'm coming back to that with a few things. So first off, when the Ben Simmons stuff was all going down, at one point a name being floated was Haliburton. And you and I have heard conflicting stuff, but basically there's a potential belief that the 76ers were asking for Fox as well, which is hilarious. We think Fox is really... Here's
Matt Moore from CBS reported that.
But here's what I'll say on that, which gets really rough because I want to go down this foxhole a little bit. Namely, De'Aaron Fox was a player, didn't look good as a rookie, but that doesn't mean anything. Sabonis didn't look good as a rookie either, but looked really good as a sophomore. We actually really liked him. Then a big tell is his junior year, I believe, you see a huge drop in minutes, so probably injured. So another player.
You're talking his third NBA year, right? Not
third
college?
NBA season.
Okay.
Oh yeah, not college. Yeah, you're right. So yeah, junior NBA season. Very,
Okay.
very close in your heart to another Kings and someone that you would like, Harrison Barnes. Whenever you see a young player miss a ton of time and they don't come back as good, it's a big tell. So basically, De'Aaron Fox, after being injured his third season, has just never looked as good.
His shooting has never gotten there, Jay. He's just not efficient.
And you kind of hit a point. That's always what's rough about young players is De'Aaron Fox for the first 4 seasons, right? You've got time. You've got time to like go, okay, is this player worth it? And then if he doesn't pick it up, you can move on. And they didn't. They signed him long. So that's the rough part. So De'Aaron Fox is overrated in our opinion at this point. But that might have been the sticking point. But the fact that there were rumors out there that the 76ers had inquired to the Kings about trading Simmons and that Haliburton was on the table, like, I don't give a damn if you're like, well, the Kings didn't tell us. I'm like, do you read the papers? I did a tweet about this using the Office Space gif of, what would you say you do here? It's like, if you're in an NBA front office and you come and say, I didn't know the Kings were interested in trading Haliburton, and you say that to me, a casual who's behind on my homework, right? I'm trying to make a spreadsheet of all these trades, Brian, and I'm behind. And I go, yeah, wasn't he in trade rumors for Simmons like a couple days ago? It's like, if you didn't go, okay, well, his name was floated for Simmons and they at least considered it, so maybe we'll go offer somebody like that alone.
Yeah, it sounds like sour grapes, doesn't it? Like,
yeah, I'm like, oh, this is your job, so you're complaining that like you couldn't do your job, so why am I going to get you any credit? But yeah, to the point, here's a few issues. Now I get to make another. Didn't think we were going to be able to talk much Embiid 76ers, even though the 76ers are meat and potatoes of the show, Brian. But another big tell about Sabonis, which is kind of rough, is if you look at his minutes, he has peaked at about 2,200 minutes. Now, admittedly, part of that was when he was younger, he wasn't getting enough minutes per game, but he has looked very, very similar to Joel Embiid in the last 3 NBA seasons, 2 of which are all-star. Namely, he played 62 games in 2020. Now, admittedly, that's lockout shortened, but even in the best case scenario, that's missing 15 games. Only played 62 games last season, and he's only at 47 right now for the season. And just doing a quick bit of math, so he's missed like 8 games now. So he could close out to be about 70. This gets into a Joel Embiid problem, namely, you can tell me Joel Embiid is an amazing player. You can tell me that he's got an all-star ceiling. But you cannot tell me that he is as valuable as other stars if I basically know he's going to miss 20 games a season. And in fact, I don't know how much longer Joel Embiid is going to hold up. This is give a shout out to DataFox21, I want to say, Paul DeVos on Twitter. If you don't follow him, he's fantastic follow in terms of some NBA stuff. But he has said before, larger NBA players, think 7 foot, 300-pound players, think Shaq, etc.
Yao Ming was another one.
Yao Ming's a huge one. And Yao Ming's problem was he played a lot of international ball too, and that's the point. These big players just put so much wear and tear on their body. Another one, Zion Williamson, like we're already seeing. Is he ever going to get on the court? They put so much wear and tear. You really have to be worried. So Sabonis is a 6'11" power forward that weighs, according to his Basketball Reference stats, 240 pounds. So he's in his mid-20s, already on a big deal, right? $20 million a season, about as good as Tyrese Haliburton. Whereas Haliburton is, first off, like, the belief you were telling me is that he tanked his draft stock to get drafted by the Kings, which was baffling to me.
I don't remember hearing that. It might have been someone else.
I've heard some people. That's
interesting.
Like, I don't know if it's true, but Haliburton allegedly was elated about getting to play for the Kings.
He cried when he got traded.
Yeah, why? It's sad to have to learn it quick, but I'm happy for him. Like, here's the thing.
That's what a lot of Kings fans are saying. Thank God he's out of Sacramento now, so he doesn't have to be ruined by us.
Yeah, Kevin Pritchard, we hate him for originating the treadmill of mediocrity meme that gets passed around a lot in terms of drafts, which he did with Portland. He has done a really good job keeping Indiana competitive, and I'm really excited to see Tyrese there. And like, this was the 2 cents you and I gave, namely, if you look at Sabonis versus Haliburton, let's say you consider them even, and I'm already saying they're not quite even because Sabonis is 26 and a big guy that's missing games already with injury. So I think Sabonis is maybe peaked, if not maybe leveling off. Haliburton is 21 years old, age curve right. He's just set to go up. That's already you might start giving the head nod to Haliburton, followed up by Haliburton is on a rookie contract. So
Yes.
you and I agreed with this. So this was our back and forth before the show. Pacers and Kings aren't going anywhere this season. They're both rebuilding.
Yep.
So look at the beginning of next season. Pacers starting with Haliburton, Kings starting with Sabonis. Basically, if you consider them even, which is nebulous, but fine, let's do it for the sake of argument. Pacers start with Tyrese Haliburton plus 16 million, whereas Kings start with Sabonis plus, using that math, plus 0. So who wins the trade? The team that has 10 wins plus 16 mil to play with, or 10 wins plus 0 to play with. Also, this is a rough one that always comes up in regards to analyzing NBA. I don't like it, but I accept it. Namely, it's not just a matter of buying wins, the Brian Bins of productivity. You look at what the free market in the NBA is going to cost you. So if you look at the skills that Sabonis has, which, like, for instance, rebounding, he's really good at rebounding. Well, I hate to tell you, the market does not value rebounding, and you can buy it for cheap, right? Players that we've loved in the past that have been game changers, Tyson Chandler, one of the most infamous to me, you can get for cheap. Players like Haliburton that score, right? You just don't get that, right?
Yep.
You don't get that for cheap. So essentially the Pacers have 16 million that they can spend on cheaper to get assets versus the Kings, who got, a good player, but now the Brian Bins of productivity they have to replace are more expensive. So in that regard, the Pacers completely won. And as I mentioned, what was bizarre, the capper on this, and then we'll see if we move on, and I'll let you talk a little more. But I basically said, if you kind of look at a rebuilding mindset, which I don't always agree with, but in this case I do, normally you want to trade veterans that aren't going to be good in time for your rebuild for young assets. Now, the assets people normally trade for, like draft picks, and I'm like, I'm sorry, those are useless. But if you trade a 26-year-old veteran on a max deal for a 21-year-old up-and-comer, that's what you're supposed to be doing when you're rebuilding. And the Kings are rebuilding, so what the hell are they doing? So that's my 2 cents on this whole thing.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, you know me, Dre. I love big players. I love centers. I love tall players because on average, they are more productive than guards. So yeah, that's true. But when you do find that guard that's really productive, you're right. They're so scarce. You have to hold on to them. It's a really good point. And one more thing on Sabonis is, again, I like him. I think he's really good and a legitimate all-star. But the type of player he is, center is really a unique position because it's one of the few places you can get rim protection from. I mean, some smaller players that play other positions do protect the rim, but they're hard to find as well, right? So even if Sabonis is a good player, I think the Pacers made the right choice to keep I'm forgetting his name, Miles, because he's a defensive specialist, right? That to me is just way more important out of the center position.
So yeah, I mean,
Miles Turner, right? It's Miles Turner. So
okay, gotcha.
The other big on the Pacers.
Oh, I got what you're saying. So you're basically saying,
I'm saying the Pacers are right to say So what happened was Sabonis and Turner are like, we don't want to play in the front court together. We're both centers. So they had to move one of them, and they picked the defensive player over the offensive player. I think that's correct, even though Sabonis is probably a better player than Turner.
Well, it's interesting because, like I said, let's go back briefly to this Brian Bins of productivity we always bring up, which is our flavor of like Dean Oliver's 4 factors, but done better.
Yeah, how do you win a game? How do you win a game?
And so, admittedly, Miles Turner is a rough bag in that he's kind of perpetually injured.
Yeah, that's true. He's hurt a lot as well.
Hovers around average, and potentially, I'm curious. It gets really hard to analyze player salary. So I think like under old stuff, he's fine. Basically, he is on an average deal. Yeah. But what you were saying is, okay, we're going to, if we look at what we already have, we have Miles Turner, we have Sabonis, they have some overlapping skill set. We're going to trade Sabonis. We're going to immediately replace Sabonis's offense with Tyrese Haliburton's offense. and we're gonna like it's an interesting point that we've brought up before. Man, I think I've said that 20 times now. The show that'll be the title of the show.
Very interesting.
But very okay. Thank you. I'll start using that for the rest, and that'll be my new go-to. But really, there is one ball, and there are overlapping skill sets. So when you are putting a team together, you have to accept diminishing returns. Sometimes a player might look worse on a team. And so what I think you're right is I think Miles Turner might start looking a little better if he starts taking more of the front court that Sabonis was doing. This was a better chemistry move. This was a better salary move. This was a better upside move. Pacers win this, and I'm not going to be surprised if they're back in the playoffs in a year or two. So whereas the King and what I've been joking about too, the last part of this is I'm saying every time there is a star for star trade, it is really it's rare to see these, and it's rare to see a team win. The one that comes to mind always is the 76ers trading Charles Barkley. But what happened in that trade was I forget the guard. It's
Jeff Hornacek was I think
it wasn't Marley. It was Hornacek. Okay,
yeah.
But they traded for Hornacek or Hornacek, sorry, whatever one. And he just
I will say Hornacek, but I'm not sure. It might be Hornacek.
I think you're right. But he walked in the offseason. So that's what I've been joking. Is I'm basically saying the Kings are going to trade trade a star for a star, and then they're going to trade like Sabonis for like draft picks in a season after they miss the playoffs. So that's where I want to go. All right, this next trade is like 100% a draft is 100% deck chairs. I think the only player of note is Juancho Hernangomez. So this is a 3-team trade, and I'm not even going to get all the teams right. Tom Satoransky didn't even stay put. So basically,
these are players from the earlier deal, right?
yeah. The Jazz get Nickeil Alexander-Walker, not good. Juancho Hernangomez, who's close to an average big. Spurs get Satoransky in a second-round pick. Trailblazers get Joe Ingles, who I believe is just. I think he's out for the season.
He's out for the season,
which is really rough. So that's a bummer. Elijah Hughes, who I don't think he's even played.
I don't know who that guy is either.
He's either let's see if I can get him on Utah. It's not for San Antonio. So let's just see if he's played any minutes for the Jazz. Hughes, slightly below average small forward that's played 112 minutes. So yeah, none of these players matter. Portland gets a second round pick for basically taking a draft must or a cap hit basically for Jazz to get up. Jazz get a slightly above average big, but it doesn't matter. It's deck chairs trade, and with how much time we spent on some of the other more important trades and will spend on some of the upcoming important trades, I'm just going to say move on unless you have any other thoughts.
No, just that allegedly Joe Ingles might come back to the Utah Jazz as a free agent. So
I mean, that'd be fine. There's no issues with that.
But I don't think any of these players are going to matter. Although I am somewhat of a fan of the Hernangomez brothers, but they just haven't gotten enough minutes.
They're not bad. I mean, it's just like I said, if you're an average to below average player, you don't matter. We don't care too much.
Yeah, I agree.
Miami opens up a roster spot, so Miami gets a second round pick, and they trade KZ Okpala. I hope I'm saying that correctly.
I don't know.
Hasn't moved the needle, and it could be that they're getting maybe they're getting who's the super old Heat player that's
Udonis Haslem.
Maybe they're getting Haslem. They're opening up a roster spot to play Haslem. Maybe that's what they're doing, right? I don't
know. The joke I heard about this trade is this is the first trade ever where the Thunder actually gave away draft picks instead of getting them back, since they have 20 draft picks.
Yeah, they're trying to win the draft in the future.
Yep.
All right, a 4-team deck chair trade. My Bucks keep making me sad because they pick up Ibaka, and Ibaka just has not been good in a while. So they got Serge Ibaka, 2 future second-round picks, and some cash. Well, none of that's going to matter. And if you've got a team with Giannis Antetokounmpo, that's a bummer. Kings got Dante DiVincenzo, Trey Lyles, and Josh Jackson. Of those players, I seem to recall that Trey Lyles in past has been okay, but I think that lasted like all of a season.
To me, the Kings win this trade because DiVincenzo is actually a player that matters. I think he's really good. Great defender, young, can shoot a little. I think he's definitely the best player in this deal.
So this gets okay, but here's the rough part. Here's the scary thing. You're absolutely right. 2020, 2021, great player. But what's one of our rules? If you're trading from Coach Bud, or Bood, whatever you want to say, you got to be really careful. And he has only played 300 minutes this season. Has been bad. So
interesting.
Here's what we'll give credit. The Kings didn't lose anything, right? They didn't trade any players that mattered. They got
Yeah,
back a
Bagley's
player
been trying to force his way off the team for a long time. That's what this deal's about.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay, that makes sense. All right, so yeah, well, I mean, it can't be fun. We'll give him a second. That wasn't in this trade, was it? That was. Oh wait, Detroit got Bagley. Okay, so
Yep.
Detroit's the one who got Bagley. Okay, so what I was going to say about that though is, they got a player with upside, and I believe he's still on his rookie contract. So yeah, he's
Yes.
got yeah. So they've got if he looks healthy at the end of the season, they got a qualifying offer and have his bird rights. So that's good. Did lose Marvin Bagley, who, I think he gets I'm going to be rough here. I think he gets a bad rap. I don't think he is as bad as people put him. Very much in line with the Sam Bowie problem of being drafted in front of two better players is really rough. That being said, he ain't great. And also he wasn't a good, so he's not as bad as people think, but he wasn't great. And also those other players were known quantities. So the defense I'll give, for instance, is some draft busts or whatever you hear about is like the Dirk Nowitzki, Vince Carter draft is notorious because I think they went like 9th and 11th or something, and a bunch of players went in front of them and they were terrible. And then of course Dirk was actually a trade. It's a funny bit of defense, Brian. It's like a Brian defense because friend, guest of the show, Ty Willinghams, will point out Dirk Nowitzki was not traded by the Bucks. That was a pick swap, and the NBA, unlike the NFL, doesn't allow pick to pick swaps. Basically, I'm not allowed to say I get the Milwaukee Bucks 6th pick, they get my 8th pick, but teams can agree ahead of time and say, when your pick comes up, you tell us who to pick, you tell us who to pick, and then we swap. And so that's what happened with Dirk. So the argument is, it wasn't that the Bucks drafted Dirk and then traded him. And in fact, it wasn't even that they could have kept Dirk if they wanted. They had already agreed ahead of time that whoever they picked was going to the Mavericks and vice versa. Now, that being said, what that means is in a draft with Dirk, they willingly passed on Dirk and wanted another player in front of Dirk that was why they did the trade.
Robert Tractor Trailer, by the way, one of my favorite NBA nicknames.
It's a great nickname, but they were afraid he was going to go sooner than that's the reason they made the thing, is they were afraid of that. So they basically agreed to that draft swap for that reason. So it's kind of a funny thing going. Their argument is, hey, we didn't miss out on Dirk intentionally. It was unintentional. It's like, okay, 6 dozen, half, 6 one way, half dozen the other. But really with, a lot of these players like that, you go, well, Dirk was an unknown. No one knew Dirk was going to be great. It took a while for Dirk to be an obvious great. Sam Bowie, it was injury concerns. Sorry, Marvin, like Luka Doncic and Trae Young, those were both really high. And I mean, here's where we get to bash, as we already have a couple times. The Kings drafting squad is terrible, which is a real bummer because Malcolm Gladwell did this op-ed that also made it into one of his books on Vivek Ranadive, I want to say, owner of the Kings. And it's like, all right, analytics are coming to the Kings, analytics. And by God, have they been terrible. And then they let a squad into this is what's, we already referenced it once. You and Chris sent it along this week to me already. The Nick Stauskas, it's like you let people into your draft room to see what you're doing. And it was such a cluster. And I was even telling you, the sad part is like, hate to be mean, you don't need a war room for a draft pick. The only thing you really need a war room for is potential trades.
Yeah.
Come draft day, you really just have a board and say best available, and ESPN has that already, right? ESPN has the ability, I know, for fantasy sports to do that. So yeah, good God. Marvin Bagley is a draft bust, sorry. And this trade is just a bunch of deck chairs and none of the other players. So Kings got Trey Lyles.
Just to bury the Kings a little more, a lot of their fans are saying, wow, we had so many bad draft picks for all these years that we busted on, including Bagley. They finally draft someone good in Haliburton and just trade him right away. It's just so Kings.
And with apologies, Rodney Hood and I'll mess up that. I've said his last name before, and I'll mess it up if I try. He's not a good pick. So yeah, this deck chair trade, let's move along.
Yep.
All right, this next one is interesting in that I think these are all like, what have you done for me lately players? I don't think any of these players moved the dial. Oh, wow. Well, Thad Young is lying in limited minutes, but, I think he hasn't been good in years.
I'm a Thad Young fan. I don't know. He is getting pretty old, though.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is I like him. I've liked him in the past. All of what's hilarious is all of these players look good per minute, but just are old and haven't gotten the minutes. So
Yeah.
Thad Young was actually pretty good for Chicago last, has been good for Chicago, but is getting old. So I would probably argue the Raptors win, getting a young Drew Eubanks, who's an above average big, Thad Young, who's had upside in the past. So I will give them that. And Goran Dragic, yeah, he was good. Like we liked him when he was younger for Phoenix, but he has not been good in years. So we've made this joke before. This has happened before, right? Masai versus Buford, who I
Right.
believe are the two respective GMs of the Raptors and the Spurs. I don't know if Buford's still in charge, but he was back in the day.
I think so.
Uh, Masai wins a trade, gets the best. I would say Eubanks is the best player in the trade, young and average. Thad Young's got some upside. They get a pick, and the Spurs get an ancient Dragic and a future pick, and it's protected. It doesn't even look at this future first round pick. It's protected in 1 through 14 in 2022, protected 1 through 13 in 2023, and then it turns into 2 second round picks. So it's like they either get a late first round or 2 second round picks. That's worthless. All right. Let's
Yeah.
let's get over some more stuff. I think this is good for Boston, if I recall. So Boston basically managed to just shed some players. Now, bums me out already how he's just being passed around as currency, but
Oh
Bol
yeah.
just has not, he just hasn't been injured, has looks like he's been injured, hasn't panned out. And PJ Dozier, who I forget, we as you mentioned, we discussed the trade. We're not going back, Brian. We can't, we still got like 7 trades left on the docket. So
Yeah. Let's keep it
we're
going.
not turning around. We're just going to keep going. But PJ Dozier is like overpaid and we don't like. So basically, the Celtics turned a bad contract, a player that's never looked great, a future second round pick into a future second round. Now,
Yeah,
again,
the Celtics made a lot of trades, so I think they just need some roster spots.
yeah, they made some ticky track trades that are good. And like this to the point, this is the type of deck chair trade we like, which is basically you move a bad contract and you just shuffle around, and you shuffle around some picks that you can use in the future. That is perfect. And what I will also use this as an argument for, because in a couple deals we are going to get to. Let me see. I'm okay. I do have it on there. Perfect. I was gonna be worried if I didn't have the Chris.
No, I mean that's a decent point that I'll just say while you're looking that up is just because we're saying most of these teams aren't a big deal and probably won't matter, it doesn't mean the teams shouldn't do them, right? It's just media shouldn't report on them that they're going to change the whole league, right?
Well,
It's just let's be real.
What's also funny about they're not going to move the Dallas production wise, and what we should also point out is a deal like this shows if you have a bad middling contract, it is not hard to get rid of it if you just wait for your spot. Now, speaking of trades that matter, though, Brian, meat and potatoes.
Here we go.
The deal we have been waiting for. Okay, Brian, this is going to be fun. This is going to be the argument. I'm really looking forward to this. Okay. Nets 76ers agree to a Simmons Harden trade. Nets get Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, a 2022 first round draft pick with the rights to defer until 2023, and a 2027 first round pick. Now, the 2022 is just kind of nice to have and be able to use as currency, and the right to defer is really nice as well, because I would say the right move might be to defer this, count on Joel Embiid and James Harden kind of falling apart next season, and then this might be a lottery pick, and then you flip that pick. 2027 clearly does not matter. But here is the fun part about this trade to me. If we go to the teams page, we go to the 76ers team page for this season. Now, they are doing pretty good. I mean, they're top of their division by 1 in front of the Celtics. Now, admittedly, that's because their division is bad, not because they're great. Their first player, pains us to say, but agree, Joel Embiid, 5 wins produced, 180 wins per 48. Not quite a star because he just can't stay on the court. He's only played 41 games and only 1,400 minutes. Like, take the over-under on if he's going to crack 2,000. Number 2 player, Tyrese Maxey, 4.5 wins, 130. But let's look at number 3 and number 4. Number 3, Andre Drummond, only 800 minutes, but star production, 243 wins per 48, 4.5 wins. And number 4, Seth Curry, slightly above average, but about 4 wins. So basically, if you argue that had he been healthy, and let's go back a season really quick. So 2021 Philadelphia 76ers, the only legitimate star player, both in terms of minutes played, we'll agree that Joel Embiid was a star player in terms of per minute, but just not minutes played. The only star player in the 76ers was Ben Simmons with 268 wins per 48 and 10.5 wins produced last season. Arguably, you could say that the Brooklyn Nets got the number 1, the number 4, and the number 5 top players on the 76ers in exchange for now we'll give credit here. We'll give credit. James Harden is good. The reports of James Harden's demise were exaggerated. 235 wins per 48, 8 wins produced this season, and just doing a quick check, I mean, last season was great too, right? He has been the top wins producer on the Nets both seasons, and last season he didn't play the full season with them, right? Because he played part of the season with the Rockets to start. So he has been a star player for the Brooklyn Nets back-to-back years, but this gets very much into this Haliburton versus Sabonis thing, which is namely Ben Simmons is a young player. Now, admittedly, I'll say his skills are underpriced. So James Harden is arguably the more expensive star, but it compensates because the NBA is a seniority-driven league in terms of contract. So James Harden is more expensive than Ben Simmons just by age. And in fact, James Harden, I mean, if James Harden had been injured in the playoffs last season, the Nets are probably the title, have a good shot at winning a title last year. Sadly, he was injured. They don't win a title. So James Harden is getting older. Ben Simmons is still young. Seth Curry and Andre Drummond are both above average. Andre Drummond has had star ceiling and is just great. So it's like the 76ers easily win this. Paul Millsap is old and useless at this point. Sad to say, because he actually played really good for the Nuggets briefly. But anyway, Nets easily win this trade, but we have a lot to say. But I'll hear if you agree or disagree with that assessment.
Yeah, the Nets definitely win the trade. I think it's arguable, who's going to be better in the playoffs this year. Probably Harden, because it's weird because, okay, here's the thing. Simmons hasn't been playing at all. So it's a little bit of a mystery box, right? Like, who knows? Maybe he's been working on his three-pointers every day and could shoot threes now. Who knows? But Harden, on the other hand, still playing really well. I agree. Rumors of his demise are not true, but he does get hurt sometimes, right? So it's arguable who's going to be better, but then when you get all that extra stuff the Nets did, yeah, they won the trade. But my real thing about this, though, is that the way that Morey and Doc Rivers and Embiid, too, for that matter, went through this process with Simmons, I thought they were going to get a terrible trade, much worse than this. So they lose the trade, but it could have been a lot worse, is my top line argument.
And what I have to give credit to you, we've talked a lot about NBA front offices in past, and you have always been cognizant of looking at it as a job, not looking at it as it geeks on the internet critiquing you. Because Daryl Morey's job is not to make a winning team, which I know sounds odd to say because that in theory is his job. His job, or at least from his perspective, is to make money and stay in the league. Same with Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers and Daryl Morey, I think, are two vastly overrated and questionable if they're even good at their respective jobs. Doc Rivers has chased stars away from multiple franchises. It's rumored back in the day he chased Tim Duncan away from the Orlando Magic. Tim Duncan was all set to go to Orlando and be on a super squad with, I want to say, was it Tracy?
Grant Hill.
Grant Hill for sure. Was it Tracy McGrady, Grant Hill as well? Those are the other two. Holy cow, what could have been, right, if not for injuries. That was rumored to have happened in the last second. Tim Duncan said that Doc Rivers told him that his family couldn't fly on the plane, and he was like, I don't know if I want to be on this squad that doesn't value me. And it's like, for F's sakes, if Tim Duncan says, can my team fly on the plane, you're like, we'll get your family their own damn plane. Get on the team, Tim Duncan. So anyway, that happened. Of course, Chris Paul on the Clippers. We've argued that the Boston Celtics, right, was just a paint by numbers squad. So it's really hard to give him too much credit for that. And then Daryl Morey, he inherited a team with Tracy McGrady and Yao Ming, had Dwight Howard, James Harden. It's argued, by the way, too, that James Harden, Hinkie was on Daryl Morey's squad. And it's questionable how much of that was Daryl Morey versus, his underlings, including Sam Hinkie, that did it. And then later Chris Paul. So both Morey and Rivers were like, are you even good at your job? And you're definitely overrated relative to, the zeitgeist, but their job is to stay in the league. And they've both done that. And I think you said it right, which is by making this trade, they were going to lose out on Simmons, and that was going to hurt. So by keeping a competitive squad, now admittedly due to like luck, right? Well, this is kind of the classic Philadelphia 76ers where like under Hinkie, they're like, the model is, to tank for all these top picks. And then the players that were doing great were like these undrafted players. And even now, right, you look and it's like, well, what's driving the 76ers? And it's like, well, little Embiid, but it's, Tyrese Maxey and Andre Drummond and Seth Curry and Matisse Thybulle and Danny Green. It's like not players that you thought were going to be what was driving you. It's these other players. So by staying competitive and by trading for a star, it's going to look fine. He's not going to get in trouble. He saves face because I was laughing. I was like, I'm going to laugh so hard when Daryl Morey trades like Ben Simmons for, I think, what was I saying, something like worse than what Sam Hinkie got for Elfrid Payton back in the day, which was like some draft picks. So he saves face here, which is all he needs to do, and he gets a star back because they were losing Simmons, right? Simmons was like, I'm not coming back, and it was actually wildly impressive. Ben Simmons and Kawhi Leonard a few years back for the Spurs, not Kings, for the Spurs. It was wild to see a star go like, I'm not playing for the team and I will sit out as long as possible. I really hope that doesn't come back to bite players in the next collective bargaining agreement, but it has happened. So yeah, I think this saves face because the 76ers, I think, honestly stay in place with this move, in that I think that it is not really possible for Harden to replace the production of Curry and Drummond, but he'll kind of match it. And, getting into the playoffs now, you have a star in the playoffs. So they're going to look fine. And even if they don't, you can say, well, chemistry, we couldn't get Harden. The last part of this is we kind of have a conspiracy theory, or at least I do. Namely, I think the Ben Simmons for James Harden trade has been in the works for a long while. I'm not alone in that. That's been, that's very similar to LeBron James to the Lakers back in the day. It was like a rumor that had been around for so long. You're like, wonder if there's something to it. And something we have said about analyzing the NBA is things that geeks like us on the internet are not privy to is like agents and player negotiate, like under the table negotiations that might hamper other things, which is to say it is possible that Morey made this agreement, thought it was going to get done quickly, then got spooked basically that it was going to be looked at unfavorably by the league. And that's what we were saying back and forth to each other pre-show. Like, namely, it's possible that he was hoping to maybe do like Ben Simmons and, maybe like Ben Simmons and Danny Green for James Harden, and thought it would look too bad to the league. So I had to make the trade look a little more competitive so the league wouldn't get upset. A comparable way back in the day is when Jason Kidd was traded from the Nets. I forget the whole details, but basically one of the players knew they were going to get bought out and go right back to the Nets. And they foolishly said that out loud to the press. They're like, oh yeah, this trade doesn't mean anything. I'll be back here soon.
Was that Keith Van Horn, or is that a different situation?
Well, so Keith Van Horn, I think what happened is Keith Van Horn was like an expiring deal that was kept around forever to make trades work for like cap reasons. So that's what happened is basically an active player in the trade was like, oh yeah, we knew this trade was going down and it's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge that I'll be back. And he was like, we can't let you do that. And so they were like, fine, we'll pay Keith Van Horn to come back to make the, I think, I'm not 100%, to make the thing. So it's basically what we're arguing is, we think, or I think, that Simmons to Harden has been in the works for months, and that it just started looking too bad. And then so eventually Morey had to settle on a slightly worse deal for it to get done. But regardless, we still think the Nets won this trade. And what's going to be hilarious and sad to me is what is really hurting the Nets right now, obviously, is Kevin Durant being out injured. Kyrie Irving, both not coming back because of vaccination. It's just fucking up there with Djokovic. So annoying, right? And he's been playing bad since he's been back. So really what is hurting this team is Kyrie Irving. It is not, James Harden was not hurting the team with his chemistry or whatever. He was playing fantastic. And Kyrie Irving was great last season for the Nets. So the question is, if Irving can get healthy in time for the playoffs, this team is, look at this already. Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, Andre Drummond. That is a sick set of players. This team can win, but as you noted, like, they're in a hole right now because that eight game losing streak, thanks to Kevin Durant being out, that's a big hole to dig out of.
Yeah, Durant's health is all that matters in the end, that's for sure. But yeah, Drummond's gonna be nice because like he's actually younger than some of the guys he's going to be replacing, right? Like LaMarcus Aldridge, I'll give him credit. He's playing a lot better than I thought he would, but still, he recently retired due to a health scare, and they just, they can't rely on him or Blake Griffin.
Aldridge, that was such a bummer. Like I said, with all these teams, we were like, do you even know what the hell you're doing? It's like, dear God, getting James Harden, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving was such a coup. And then to turn that around, and I think what they had DeAndre Jordan at some point too during that, right?
They did.
And then they picked up like Blake Griffin and LaMarcus Aldridge, and you're like, what the hell are you doing? And they lose by this thin margin in the playoffs. It's like these teams can get the stars, and then they just can't get the couple of players that matter. But the Nets are, basically the Nets are on great shape going into the playoffs. And I think something we're really hoping for, right, is we're all hoping for a Nets 76ers matchup in the playoffs. That we hope that happens.
That'd be fun.
All right. Another trade that kind of matters, which is shocking to me. I'm going to give the win, as you were already noting, the Boston Celtics. So the trade is Boston Celtics acquired Derek White in exchange for Josh Richardson, Romeo Langford, and some picks, as we noted, and a pick swap. Pick swap is even like, if I'm like a pick doesn't matter, like a pick swap matters even less. Now, Josh Richardson's an interesting cat, but I would say really production has just been close to average, kind of up and down. So it's not a big loss. And then Romeo Langford, actually, this is an interesting. I want to look at him really quick. Romeo Langford's been all right. Hard to say. Above average this season, still super young, not a lot of minutes played. Derek White, though, I'm definitely going to eye test overrate him. So a few seasons back, the Denver Nuggets almost got scared out of the playoffs by the Spurs, and really it was Derek White coming out of nowhere. But he's still really good. He's a really good player. Not quite star, 150 wins per 48. So that's 50% batting average player, but he has been a significantly above average player, except for last season. That's scare, right? Only 1,000 minutes played. So anytime you see a player take a hit, but looks like he's back at good levels. Young player, above average. I guess he's from CU, Brian, so I like him even more now. So Boston got a good player in exchange for two below average players. Well, a below average player, a who knows player, and some picks. So good job on the Celtics.
I'm a lot more meh on this trade than you. Maybe I like Josh Richardson more, but yeah, I mean, White's the younger player, so I guess that's why everyone likes this trade. But I don't think it matters that much.
All right.
All these players are fine.
This next trade is really fascinating to me, and I'm actually kind of confused, and I see why I'm confused. So Phoenix Suns get Torrey Craig back. Good God, why does nobody respect Torrey Craig? He was on Denver, and when he was on Denver, Greg, I just dropped his last name, but Greg Steele. How did I drop Greg? How is that? That is not a forgettable name. Apologies, Greg. One of our favorite analysts out there, Greg Steele. You can find him on Twitter as Greek Goddess Stats. He was writing up like defensive articles and going like, according to the defensive numbers, Torrey Craig is one of the top defenders in the NBA, backcourt defenders at least. And his box score statistics were great. And the Nuggets let him walk for nothing. And Milwaukee picked him up for nothing, and they traded him for nothing to Phoenix. And I want to look up his contract really quick because I'm sure he is not for anything on Indiana at the moment. Yeah, like he is. Okay, so he got paid a little. So he was like getting like $2 million last year from Phoenix, and then he went to get paid and is getting $5 million on Indiana. But Indiana just gave him up for Jalen Smith, and Jalen Smith is fine. He's
he hasn't really played that much.
He's close to average as a big.
I think the Pacers are just saying we're tanking, so we're going to let you go, Torrey Craig, and we're going to get a second round pick out of it.
Yeah, so they got a second round pick. This really helps the Suns out again. And like I was confused as why Torrey Craig looked like he took a nosedive this season. And we have him listed as a small forward for Indiana, but I guess because of size, he's been getting boosted up to a power forward. So if you play Torrey Craig as a guard or small forward, he's above average. So this is definitely, the Suns aren't going to be using him as a big with freaking Ayton there. So you got Chris Paul, Devin Booker. Let's see, a couple of the Suns look great. I think the Suns are the favorite. This is just get Torrey Craig back for the playoffs. Good call.
Yeah, I love Bridges on the Suns too.
All right, now this next trade, Brian, is going to get an award. So I am giving Montrezl Harrel the annual Boxscore Geeks, or at least I'll say he is the front runner with very hard to lose it. The front runner for the annual Boxscore Geeks Kenneth Faried Award. And what this award is for a productive player that helps their team win that is inexplicably snubbed by their team. And so the reason I give this to you is so Montrezl Harrel from the Wizards. Here's what's kind of fascinating. Obviously, we talked it a little last week. There are obvious reasons for us to have beef with the Wizards. And they're not even playing that great this season. It doesn't matter. But the Wizards got out from Russell Westbrook. And what's kind of funny is Russell Westbrook actually looked really good for them last season. But prognosticator galore who's I'm hoping, Brian, I'll tease a little. We might get to talk a little bit more on a podcast with Chris Ye about the predictions of Russell Westbrook's future. But Chris Ye about Russell Westbrook was like, he's like Dwayne Wade, and he's just going to go. And that happened. You know, I feel bad that Chris had to be both right about this and that it had to happen on his Lakers. So Russell Westbrook has been, we thought was MVP caliber. We thought was a great player last season, but the Wizards got out of him. And the reason they won, though, is they got back Montrezl Harrell. And then they just, and it's going to get worse in just a second here. We're going to keep going. They got back Ish Smith and Vernon Carey. Do you know how the correct pronunciation?
It's Carey, yeah. He was actually really good in college, but he hasn't really played in the pros at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's what is so tough about and he hasn't looked good in 17 minutes doesn't mean nothing,
yeah.
Right, Brian? He's played a grand total of 130 minutes, hasn't been above average. But, you know, basically they traded a star level per minute NBA player for Ish Smith has never been good, if I recall, right? Ish Smith has just never been a good NBA. He's god awful this season in 500 minutes. And I seem to recall in past seasons has been awful in more minutes played.
I'm not a big fan of Smith. He's kind of a smaller guard.
Oh, yeah, Brian. Well, I mean, you're not actually wrong to hate what you're saying, which is, you know, and traditionally you're like, you don't like shorter players. And it's like, even Curry doesn't count, right? Curry is short, you know, arms are shorter, but he's still like 6'2". Yeah, Ish Smith has been at his peak an average guard, but just I'm looking at like his Boxscore Geeks page. You're probably in the same boat. I didn't realize he's been around as long as he has. He's been around since 2011. Yeah. Jeez, yep. Brian. So
played for the Warriors in the old days.
Played for over a decade, briefly, a cup of coffee with the Warriors for 63 minutes, but just a sea of red in terms of below average stats. So not good player, unknown player for known asset. Now it's sad because like the Hornets aren't going to do anything with Montrezl Harrell, but like Montrezl Harrell was a player that I almost thought meant the Chris Paul trade from the Clippers might have worked out in the Clippers' favor, because this take aged horribly. I was like, Chris Paul is old. He might be done. And Montrezl Harrell is young and up and coming. So maybe the Clippers win. But then, of course, the Clippers just let Montrezl Harrell walk. And then Chris Paul stayed Chris Paul. And this season, Brian, Chris Paul, finals MVP Chris Paul. So Montrezl Harrell remains snubbed. And, you know, the Wizards, despite where's the funny thing? Dean Oliver's on staff, but he's an assistant coach. He's not in the front office, but they're not making smart moves as if he's in the front office. So anyway, horrible trade by the Wizards, and it gets worse. Any comments on that before we go to the next part about what happened for the Wizards?
Yeah, just that the Wizards have a ton of centers. Even before this other trade we're going to talk about, they have Gafford, they have Thomas Bryant, they have all these centers. So I'm sure Harrell was just like, we're a bad team, we're loaded with centers, get me out of here. That'd be my guess. But yeah, because the Wizards aren't going anywhere this year.
All right, so this next one, I'm going to bring up a Shel Silverstein So the next trade, by the way, is the Wizards land Kristaps Porzingis in exchange for Spencer Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans. Now, what I will give, let me, I'm going to confuse the names because, you know, they start getting interchangeable. And Brian, I'm impressed with, you know, I'll say this. I don't know how much you had in front of you, but, you know, I'm basically kind of like running. I was hoping to get a bunch of this prepped and did not. So I'm typing in. So I'm impressed by how we're doing. And I appreciate you correcting any names and whatever. Yep. Okay. So Spencer Dinwiddie is average, right? I think he's never at his peak for Brooklyn a few years back, 128 wins per 48, 2,300 minutes played, 1,300 minutes played. I mean, he's an average point guard. Nothing to write home about. Haven't seen a bunch of upside, so I'm not excited about him. Davis Bertans is terrible this season, and I don't think he's ever been great, if I recall.
He's just one of those bigs that's a three-point shooter, but isn't a great three-point shooter and also does do the big stuff well. So, I mean, for me, this trade is like all three of these players got big contracts. Well, big is relative, but got paid. Yeah. And the teams, I think, just had buyer's remorse. Like the Wizards wanted to move on from Dinwiddie and Bertans. They didn't work out there. And obviously, it turns out Luka hated Porzingis and wanted him gone.
Well, so, with good reason, because Porzingis is terrible. And I mean, I tweeted about this. I basically said, I'm sorry, if you have a 7-footer that's eating a fourth of your cap space that can't shoot, can't rebound, and can't stay on the court, you can't pay that player. Like, you know, we were right. I have an article that, depending on if I get show links and whatever up for this, Brian, I'll get the tweet about. But it's like, I wrote about how like Kristaps Porzingis was a horrible trade from the get-go, and it's hilarious that at any point the Dallas Mavericks said this. Now, here's what's funny. I think Dallas wins because of a very funny reason. They kind of did a computer sciencey approach. I saw some people saying Washington won because Dinwiddie and Bertans are both on horrible contracts, and Dinwiddie's average and on an average contract, so he's not terrible, but you don't ideal world, you don't want to pay an average player market rate if you can avoid it, right? You want to pay less than that, and Bertans is overpaid. If you turn two bad contracts into one bad contract, I argue you lose because it is harder to move one bad contract earlier, right? As you saw earlier, the Boston Celtics were able to move PJ Dozier however you say it. I thought that was a bad contract, and they were able to move it for like a pick swap. So it's like the Mavericks took a bad player. Now, admittedly, here's what I'm going to throw out, by the way. So throwing this out there, as I said, as recently as last year, James Mercado, former editor at Wages of Wins, one of the editors, so not lead editor. I was the lead editor back in the day, but he was a fantastic editor, fantastic writer. Loved him at Wages of Wins. Wrote one of my favorite pieces at his blog about Austin Rivers being the worst draft pick, worst player on the draft board in the draft, and fantastic. So love him, but did eventually land at the Mavericks. But what I'll say is, like, we've had 3 times now, at least major ones. Chris Kaman, Monte Ellis, Kristaps Porzingis. 3 major players were like, don't sign this player, Mavericks, that we've said for free. And even with a former Wages of Wins, writer on staff, they still went ahead with that player. And we've been like 3 up, 3 down, right, Brian? I'm taking the win. So, and as I mentioned before, we're not going to get any kudos or accolades for it. But Kristaps Porzingis was a horrible pickup. Namely, you can't pick up a player that is injured, that has not played above average, and then hope that they're going to both get healthy and get above average. That's a horrible, it's a bad investment, idea. And they did it, and it didn't work out. And so I think what you said pre-show, I'm stealing your line, but it's such a great line. It's genius. You were basically saying, in regards to both Morey and it's not Cuban, right? What's funny is Cuban gets a lot of the front-facing stuff, but here's the easy out. At least according to a lot of the shenanigans, to put it as politely as possible, that Dallas got into. So when Dallas got into all the shenanigans and major front office problems, and they kept it going with like Jason Kidd, so good work. When all the stuff came out, basically Cuban was like, it's my bad. I wasn't as aware of everything going on as I was supposed to be. So this is my fault. I should have been more aware. Now, the funny out of that is then for all of the people like us that were saying Cuban's making these bad moves, it's like by his own volition, he's like, I'm not as involved as this stuff as you all think I am. So that's what I'll throw out there. So Nico Harrison, apologies. The exec in front of the Mavericks, right? They made a good move in basically saying Porzingis was wrong. We're going to move on, and we're going to turn him into easier to move pieces. And one of the good pieces of news is Spencer Dinwiddie is at least an above average player that can, help, or an average player that can help this season. And these 2 players will be easier to move. And the annoying thing I put in is, first off, the Mavericks are a winning squad. They're in the playoffs, so they're fine. If you're a playoff squad with a star in the NBA, you are fine. You are never, like, as I keep coming back to you're shockingly quiet, given that Draymond Green is likely out for the season, but you're shockingly quiet Warriors. If you are a playoff squad with a MVP caliber player, you're never that far from contending. The Warriors turned it around in a season, admittedly with some luck, but it happens. So the Mavericks are fine, and they basically, the way you phrased it about Cuban and Morey, more accurately Harrison and Morey, is they made we're giving them credit for cleaning up the messes they made. So we're basically saying, good job, Mavericks, for moving on for Porzingis. This is the right set of steps to go forward. And sorry for that long diatribe. I'm basically saying the key Brian point is cleaning up the messes that they made.
Now, your response to me, I do agree with to some extent, which was, well, they waited 2.5 years to clean up that mess. But I thought they were going to go all the way, right? I thought it was an untradeable contract, and they were just stuck with him. So, again, this is the whole grading on a curve, right? I didn't think that highly of the Mavericks front office. So to get off of that sunk cost and admit they were wrong on Porzingis is good. That being said, though, I'm not sure, but this could have been one of those things where Luka is like, he's got to go. I haven't seen that, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Let me see if I can find this one really quick. I want to give some kudos to this. Okay, basically. By the way, shout out to Ben Guest, who's apparently watching live because he's already commenting on some of the stuff that we were saying on the live stream. So appreciate that. Okay, got to give another shout out to Tyler Conway, who I've done before. So he said Ben Simmons, James Harden, Kristaps Porzingis, Spencer Dinwiddie, Dennis Schroeder, Enes Kanter, Freedom. Bro, this wasn't a trade deadline. This was a get the hell away from me deadline. So
Yeah.
yes, to your point, I'm like maybe that.
I think
All
so.
right.
Yeah, a lot of these trades that seem like deck tier trades probably do have a lot of personalities involved.
Yeah, and then not even in some of the star trades. Like that's the
Yeah.
thing. Star trades are rare, and so the
Yep.
reason we're seeing some of these start. I mean, that there are. I've got to laugh that Kyrie Irving was able to duck so much scrutiny this season by like James Harden, but it does sound like James Harden was like, I do not like Kyrie Irving, and I don't want to be here. And I mean, we will give this his credit to Daryl Morey. We'll see what happens with James Harden and Doc Rivers, but James Harden wants to play under Morey again. So I mean that's at least a selling point there. And that has this is the frustrating thing. For as much as we bash Daryl Morey for bad ticky tack moves, for the Kyle Andersons and Eric Gordons and et cetera, and Jeff Greens and Austin Rivers, stars seem to like him. Stars seem to keep coming back. A comment I heard about the Mavericks was like the Mavericks are counting on like free agent signing there, and it's true. Like think of a free agent that is signed with the Mavericks willingly. I can think of a lot of cases where not just a free, but like a star free agent. Like I can think of a lot of cases where a star free agent like was a big, like DeAndre Jordan was a thought, and he did eventually, but he signed after his prime, and he was signing as a stopgap while he was waiting for Kevin Durant to get to the Nets, as an example. And apologies, way back to the start of the Shel Silverstein, just to close that loop. Shel Silverstein has a poem called like Five is More Than Four or something. And it's about this little kid that gets $1 from his dad, and he goes out and he trades $1 for 2 quarters because 2 quarters are worth more. 2 is worth more than 1. Then he trades the 2 quarters for like 3 dimes because 3 is worth more than 2. And then he comes back at the end of the day with 5 pennies and says, Dad, I won. I got 5. 5 is more than 1. So when I saw people defending this trade and going, the Wizards won the trade because the Wizards got rid of 2 bad contract. The Mavericks got rid of, or the Wizards got rid of 2 bad contracts. The Mavericks only got rid of 1. It's like, that's not how it works. I tweeted back, I was like, I'm going to have to say that just by how the salary cap works, I'm going to guess that Spencer and Davis have contracts that are about half as bad as Kristaps Porzingis just by how.
Yeah, they're like 16 and 17 each a year, I think, and Porzingis is over 30. So yeah, together they're combined about as much as him.
All right, now this next one is a little interesting, and that
this is our last trade.
Oh my God, we made it. I think the Celtics lost this trade, but it kind of shows another Rorschach test. So the Celtics got Daniel Tice, I want to say.
Yep.
For Dennis Schroeder, Enes Freedom, and Bruno Fernando. Now, here's the deal. Enes Kanter, now Enes Freedom, we've said for years is underrated. We really like him. It's so funny to see people claim that they care about defense, and then like you get a shooting guard that can't play defense but hucks up 20 shots a game, and people think they're great. Enes Freedom has been an above average player and a productive player, but has had a lot of off the court stuff. Lots of weird rumors about why he says a lot of political stuff. He says, interesting cat. So, I mean, some people are basically saying they're just happy to get Enes off the team for the headache. Dennis Schroeder is not great, but is close to average as a guard, which I mean, again, like we're saying, like deck chairs, we don't care too much. And then Bruno Fernando, I just want to check really quick as to like,
he hasn't played much.
Yeah, I think he's like close to average. So, I mean, really what happened, if you look at this though, is the Celtics got rid of a slightly below average guard, an above average big, and a mystery box center for a below average big that has had slightly above average in the past. So like the Derek White trade I thought was fantastic. This trade I think was bad for Boston, but maybe was just like getting rid of some drama on the
Celtics fans love Tice. They're really happy to have him back, and they love his defense. Yeah,
he was really, really good as a rookie. Okay as a sophomore in the NBA. Okay as a sophomore. A like almost Kendrick. I would call him like Kendrick Perkins as a junior, as in above average, 1,500 minutes. But since then, I can't tell if it's injury or just downhill. This season, he's been horrible for Houston, but I will admit, like, who freaking knows on Houston, right? Like what that squad's doing, what their
Yeah.
wants, demands are, if they're tanking. So we'll see how he does. I mean, the Celtics lost this trade, but they didn't lose a ton. And I think they did okay enough on their other trades and are in a good enough spot that, they'll make it to the playoffs. They'll probably lose in the first round, but they're in fine shape. And it's another one of these funny situations where, like, it's really amusing where you watch some teams fall apart. So like the Celtics as an example, right? Brad Stevens left. Who is the I feel bad that I'm forgetting the front office, the GM guy that also left.
Oh, I thought Stevens became the GM there.
Oh yeah, that's what happened. So
he
who
quit being
the
the coach and became the GM.
Yeah, so it stopped being.
Well, so Ainge was there for a long time, and then he quit. Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying is they basically had Ainge and Stevens simultaneous. Basically Ainge and Stevens steps down, but Stevens did move up. They basically finished. They lost in the first round. That was last year, 2021, and like, okay, so everything's falling apart, and they're still an above average team, and they're still rebuilding and doing fine. So it's like, it is amusing, this myth that people will have about like, oh my God, this team has to rebuild and has to tear everything down.
No.
It's like the Celtics are like, okay, well, we lost some players, we still have some drama, we're still an above average team, and you can even make some bad moves because most of these moves are deck chair moves. You make a couple of good moves, you keep good players on the squad, and you can still be a contender, especially if you're in a good market, which the Celtics are. Holy cow, Brian. Did we do it? We did it.
That's it. Those are all the trades.
Any other comments? I've got a huge shout out that's going to be its own topic too. So we'll go for that, and I'll have a story on that. But anything else you want to say on the trades? Thank you so much for being able to do this, because this was last second.
It was fun.
What I was going to say is that this helped kill another streak, but helped keep another streak going. So I had a brief streak where at nerdnumbers.substack.com, I was writing an article every day. By the way, a stomach bug on the weekend and daycare getting shut down in the afternoon. Those two things together, killed that. But we kept the podcast streak going, Brian. Now, I think a streak that's going to end, unless you find something at the wire, is we had 2 weeks in a row of Warriors puns as titles. I don't think that's going to happen this week. It seems pretty unlikely, especially since the Warriors didn't show up in any of the major trades. So we will see. But happy to keep this streak going with that. And we'll see if I write anything up, because this is a long podcast. And I want to get this out tomorrow in time to be like next day.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say for sure, if so a lot of teams didn't make any deals at all, right? The Lakers and the Knicks are the two big ones that everyone's pointing to because they seem to be kind of disastrous teams. Of course, the Warriors didn't either. And who knows what deals were available to them, but I'm surprised a lot of teams didn't make deals.
I want to save a lot of the Lakers talk for if we get Chris, which I think is definitely a possibility in the next few weeks. I've reached out because basically I want to argue. I want to stress that Chris has made some very astute, sound takes. Chris is much more connected in terms of following the zeitgeist, knowing everything. So I'm like laughing at myself ahead of time, going like, we got in not even an argument, but I think you jumped in on Twitter on it too. So Chris was talking back and forth with Tim Taylor. We both love. They've been on Chris Ye's podcast multiple times. They're the people that got me into Ted Lasso. So we love them both. They were talking about Russell Westbrook. And I'm basically saying Russell Westbrook wants to get paid. So that's why he's not going to play team ball. And Chris is saying Russell Westbrook's not going to get paid. So I want to argue with Chris about the future of Russell Westbrook's contract, which should be a lot of fun. And then also that's a great place to talk more Lakers stuff, because I think the Lakers are getting more flack than deserved. It is surprising they didn't do more at the trade deadline, but that's not even, I wrote an article already this year about that, where that's not a bad thing, right? Like, it would have been nice, but what you don't want to do as a team is you don't want to make bad moves and sign Karis LeVerts that are really overpriced. So we'll see what happens with the Lakers. And by the way, I keep harping this, but the title the Lakers got from LeBron is enough. I've said this before. I am a Nuggets fan. The Nuggets were briefly in the NBA, one of only two teams next to the Spurs that had made 10 consecutive NBA playoffs. This was years ago, obviously, like with George Karl. And I'm going to tell you this right now. You know what nobody comes back and says? Nobody says, hey, that 09, that 08 Celtics team that won a title was great, but, they fell apart after a few seasons. They didn't make 10 playoffs like the Nuggets. Oh, the Lakers won back-to-back titles, but, they missed the playoffs for a year with Kobe and lost in the first round. No one says that. No one gives a damn if you miss the playoffs for a couple of years if you win titles. So the Lakers were 100% right. And I mean, they've been unlucky. They were really unlucky that they re-signed Anthony Davis when it looked like a smart move and then he got injured. That really, really sucks. But rest assured, do you really think the Lakers are more than 3 or 4 years from competing again? Absolutely not. So there's that.
Yep.
But yeah, I'll say more Lakers thoughts. They were quiet at the trade deadline. That there's a variety of reasons that could be, and we'll just see what happens next year. But that title's worth everything. That title gives you a decade of bad play, and they're not going to get a decade of bad play. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah, I don't get people saying, that, bubble Disneyland title is whatever puns they want. That's a Mickey Mouse title, or, you know what? You play with the game that's in front of you, right? I mean, that was what happened that year. Everyone was playing under those conditions, so I don't diminish the bubble title at all.
And it's also baffling that they were top of the West when everything went down. It's like you can't even say that, right? Like the 2004 Lakers and the 2020 Lakers are two like squads that I just hate the post hoc narratives about, but is what it is. All right, Brian, are you ready for I've got a major shout out that's going to take a little bit of time.
Okay, good. I don't have any, so take us out.
All right, shout out to my dentist and Hikaru Nakamura. So here's the fun thing. I had a dentist appointment scheduled for lunch today. I left while Hikaru Nakamura was playing in the FIDE Grand Prix. And I also left right before the Ben Simmons thing went down. So my dentist appointment cost some major stuff for me. So it's obviously a sarcastic shout out to my dentist, but good to take care of your teeth. Anyway, Hikaru Nakamura, after 2 years of not playing chess, he was someone who took COVID very, very seriously. So didn't play chess, is playing in the Grand Prix, which is the last major event that can get a player into the candidates tournament. The candidates tournament being the run up to the World Chess Championship. Now, Hikaru is a super duper long shot. He's even a super duper long shot in the tournament he's in. But in the preliminary round, today he forced a draw against Andrei Esipenko to make it to essentially the quarterfinals or it's straight semifinal, not quarter. So to make it to the semifinals. The reason this is key is a variety of reasons. Him and Esipenko were 1 and 2. So whoever a draw from Hikaru advanced Hikaru, a win from Hikaru advanced Hikaru, but a win from Esipenko advanced Esipenko. And Hikaru looked like he was losing. He was down -6, which in chess is like death. And he managed to pull a draw out of that. And I left while he was losing. I was like, oh man, Hikaru's going to lose. He pulled a draw out, which is a remarkable achievement and absolutely huge. Now, this is where we get to go into chess narrative, Steve Bryant. So former world chess champion contender, I guess we'll call it, is Sergei Karyakin. So Karyakin was another long shot that managed to make it to the World Chess Championship against Magnus Carlsen and actually take it to overtime against Magnus, which is a remarkable achievement. Before this tournament, he said Hikaru Nakamura, because he had basically not played professional chess in 2 years, because he took COVID seriously and basically played a ton of online. And what's hilarious, in my opinion, too, is Hikaru Nakamura really helped bring chess streaming to prominence. He's a huge Twitch name. And him with Magnus Carlsen really elevated chess during the coronavirus pandemic, which sucks. Like, it's one of the few shining spots of it. Really elevated chess during that time, playing online chess. So to be like, Hikaru Nakamura hasn't been playing chess in 2 years, why should we take him seriously when he did so much online streaming is ridiculous to me. So that's one. But Karyakin said Hikaru had no business being in this tournament and the spot should have gone to Andrei Esipenko. So Andrei Esipenko was a late second call-up because Ding Liren wasn't allowed into the tournament because of basically, COVID's been all sorts of weird for a variety of reasons. Not anything stupid like Djokovic with that, but it was related to that. So basically, Karyakin came and said, Hikaru doesn't belong in this tournament. Andrei Esipenko should have been in this tournament instead. Esipenko gets in, plays against Hikaru, and Hikaru has a decisive win against him early in the tournament, and then a comeback draw to win against him. So like perfect narrative street. Amazing game. And from a chess fan like myself, just a hell of a lot of fun to watch.
Good stuff.
Yeah, good stuff.
Good stuff.
All right. Well, this has been a super long show. I think Brian and I are both going to get some tea for our voices. This will be out tomorrow for those of you that didn't catch it live. Anything else you want to say on the trade deadline other than thank you? And the Boxscore Geek Show is now officially back. Thank you for Simmons getting traded.
Oh, yeah. Gonna go watch a bunch of curling, actually. Some Olympic curling.
Ooh, very nice. Any
Chess on ice, Dre.
Chess on ice. And I was going to say, we've mentioned this before. Didn't the U.S. team, like, they medaled, right? I don't know if it was gold, but
they won the gold medal 4 years ago. Yep.
And one of the people is from Wisconsin. So there we go. I love it.
Yep.
All right. So anyway, that has been the Boxscore Geeks show. If you find us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We go live sometimes, sometimes it'll be based around the trade deadline, twitch.tv/nerd numbers. If you missed those, you can catch the recaps on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. Of course, you can find us on iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geeks show. Your host, Dre Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers. Boxscore did it again, Brian. I mean to say Brian Foster, aka Boxscore Brian on Twitter. We'll see you next week, and we'll see if the trade worked out for your team, right?